Looking for music that lifts your spirit and fills your heart? Experience the powerful sound of the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. Now streaming on all your favorite music platforms. Find the Tabernacle Choir on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Amazon Music, and Pandora. Let the music of the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square inspire you today and every day. Whether you're at home, in the car, or on the go, enjoy the beauty of their world-renowned sound anytime. The Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square, streaming now.
DJ and PK, it's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We're joined now by Mike Golic Jr., ESPN, covers a lot of the Big 12. Mike, good morning.
Morning, guys. How we doing?
Good. You've made it home safely from the Big 12 Media Days at the Star in Dallas. I'm curious, with these big, sprawling coast-to-coast leagues, you can't follow everything about every team. So when you leave somewhere like that, what's your number one takeaway? What do you leave knowing that you didn't know when you went there?
Well, I think you leave kind of seeing the big picture for the conference first and foremost. And we know for the Big 12, right, the last month and a half or so have been dominated by conversations about Brendan Sorsby, about the gambling allegations, the will he, won't he play this year, Texas Tech with the bullseye firmly on their back. And then you get to media day, and Brett Mormark, the commissioner, does his damnedest to put that conversation off for another day, focus on football. But then they also have the big business announcements that wind up becoming the face, I think, of Big 12 Media Days, the Monster Energy sponsorship, a lot of reaction to that. But I guess just a signal overall for the conference, right, that as we ease into the football, this is a league that is trying every which way to branch towards the future, to make sure that whatever version of this sport looks like going forward, that they are funded enough, branded enough to have some staying power there. And you can debate whether or not some of those strategies have actually worked or not. But one thing you can't debate is Brett Yormark and the league office are trying their damnedest to make sure the Big 12 stays incredibly relevant on and off the field in this day and age.
Yeah, I think that's true. I would have liked Mike to just maybe address it a little bit instead of saying it was a discussion for another day, because then that begs the question, okay, when does that day come? I'm of the opinion, get it out there, make your statement, and then move on. But they chose to do what he chose to do what he did. I guess that's so be it. They were talking about as he tries to put the best foot forward, and I get it. It's a PR spin constantly. It's got to sell it. And, we got two Big 12 teams here, so, we follow the conference like it's the biggest thing ever for us when it comes time to college football in our market, clearly. They talk about, I'm an old Pac-12 guy, although I was born in New Jersey, just like you. But I went to ASU, and that's where your dad actually worked in the Phoenix market. I think that's where he may have gotten his start as a talk radio sports guy. So the demise of the Pac-12 was disheartening for me. But I always thought the conference, it wasn't necessarily the most physical conference, but you seem to have good skill guys. And as I look at the Big 12, I hear Yormark talking about, the conference of quarterbacks, and the big Pac-12 used to be really good there. As you evaluate their quarterbacks in the conference as a collective, what do you see?
Yeah, I think it's a group that still on the high end has some really high highs. And you look at the top three teams in the conference. I know he hasn't been talked about as much, and we'll start to more, but Will Hammond did a darn good job in pinch hitting for Baron Morton last year for Texas Tech, and a lot of people there feel like he can acquit himself well now that he's going to be the man when healthy. Bear Bachmeier going into year two. Devin Dampier, another year under his belt, 2 years starting between his prior stop and then Utah last year. And then I think you get into a really interesting transfer group of quarterbacks in the Big 12. That's kind of what's caught my eye this year. Is I'm fascinated how in some less than stellar scenarios for some of these guys, or some certainly challenging scenarios, how guys are going to fare. Like Jalen Rayner, the quarterback coming over from Arkansas State, who was the Sun Belt Player of the Year, trying to see what he can do for Iowa State now with a new regime there. DJ Lagway coming over from Florida as Dave Aranda and Baylor try and right the ship. There's a lot of talent working their way in the league. Drew Mestemaker and the North Texas faction trying to help revive Oklahoma State after the end of the Mike Gundy era. So there's plenty of really compelling characters. Even if you say, well, I'm not sure if the team is yet ready to support those guys, I know there's talent enough under center to make it interesting.
You talk about the league trying to up its profile. The best thing they could do is win a bunch of non-conference games. But it looks to me like the conference games basically break down into a couple of groups. One is, Well, I don't see how you're going to do that. Oklahoma State trying to beat Oregon. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of, well, you'd better. TCU, North Carolina, Utah, Arkansas. Arkansas's coming off a 2-10 year. Utah had better win. Baylor and Auburn. Auburn's the losing record for 3 years under Hugh Freeze, so he's out. They got a new coach. Baylor had better win. Cincinnati had better beat Boston College. The BYU Notre Dame game, that one sticks out as a massive opportunity. And BYU's at home. Notre Dame's got to be the favorite, but BYU's got a chance. How many opportunities do you see realistically for the league to lift its reputation in non-conference games?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you described there, the Auburn one I circle, the Arkansas one I circle, just because it's still the SEC. And I understand, teams breaking in new coaches, teams that have been kind of down in the dumps in the last couple of years. But still, you come with that pedigree, and we know right, wrong, or indifferent right now. The SEC, the Big Ten, still the dominant conferences in the sport. But really, if we're going to talk about the measuring stick, it is BYU hosting Notre Dame, because you look around the league, right? In my mind, I'm looking to see on all these schedules, all right, do you play Texas Tech, BYU, Utah? Because I know what those teams are capable of with the returning production, with the coaches that are going to be on the sideline for all those teams, with what they put on tape last year. I know those are going to be good teams, so that's how I'm going to measure the rest of the Big 12 by and large. Then for the Big 12 to be measured against everyone else, it's going to be, how do you stack up against the Notre Dame team that's got the most returning production? That game will be their first real challenge of the year. And I think for a lot of people, and for two teams, right, that were just on the outside looking into the college football playoff, there's going to be a big chip on both shoulders going into that game. So that's really the one where I think if you're the conference, and now we're getting to November when the college football playoff rankings start coming out midweek, and you're having those discussions, having that taste fresh in everyone's mouth for the home stretch of the season would go a long way.
As usual, we got some new coaches. I don't think we're that surprised that Morgan Scalley took over. It's a matter of when, although we might be shocked that Kyle Whittingham went to Michigan. Wow, what a story on that one. And then K-State bringing in one of their own, younger guy, and Klein and all that stuff, and some other folks out there. What do you think of the coaching, particularly the new coaching, going forward in this conference?
Yeah, well, you're right. It kind of divides into two camps, because you mentioned, for Morgan Scalley, tons of familiarity, obviously has been groomed for this for a while. It comes in and is able to continue a culture that was built under Kyle Whittingham and has been laid as a foundation for a while. Colin Klein, same thing, right? He's got so many ties to, as he talked about at Media Day, the prior two coaching regimes on campus, both as a player, then as an assistant for multiple years, did his 2-year study abroad with Mike Elko, and now comes home. And then you've got the ones that are coming in with wholesale change, right? Jimmy Rogers going to Iowa State, coming from Wazoo, trying to follow up the most successful era of Iowa State football under Matt Campbell, now at Penn State. And then Eric Morris going to Oklahoma State, trying to revive that, coming off a successful tenure at Oklahoma State. And so I think it's interesting in both, and you hear them talk about it. Morgan Scalley hammered culture. And when you've got familiarity with the way things were done before, it makes it easier to institute that, because the guys that stuck around, and there's a lot of continuity for both of those guys, can help disseminate that message. They already know how it's done. For Iowa State, for Oklahoma State, there's going to be a lot of learning on the fly, and so much of your off-season bandwidth devoted to just teaching teams how they do it. I went through a coaching change in college, came in under Charlie Weiss at Notre Dame, went out under Brian Kelly, and that first-year transition, you're just learning, how do I set up my locker room? How do we do our off-season mat drills? What's expected of us in the weight room? How are we going to structure practice, meetings? All these things I'm trying to learn to show the staff that I can learn and that I can take coaching. Then it means, all right, we got to do that before we can even worry about the product on the field, and I think that's what makes things difficult for some of those new teams.
Texas Tech's the defending champ. Utah and BYU were clearly second and third last year. High expectations for all three of those teams. Who in the league do you think can stand shoulder to shoulder with those teams and should be right in that mix?
Yeah, you know what? I think that's a pretty firm upper crust in my mind, just in terms of like the talent on those rosters, the way they're built and invested in along the trenches, the talent that they've got, at quarterback, especially with BYU and Utah. At Texas Tech, like we said, there's a lot to like, but over a long sample size, we'll wait and see. I think the teams that'll be kind of in that next tax bracket trying to see if they can make the hump over, right? I think you look at Houston coming off a 10-win season, brings back a great quarterback, a dynamite wide receiver, and Amari Thomas, who was a breakout player last year, both coordinators on both sides of the football. So you've got that continuity there. I think Arizona, Noah Fafita, that veteran presence, another school that retained both coordinators, especially defensively. I thought Danny Gonzalez, their DC, was a revelation last year. And the fact that they kept him, lose a ton on the back end, four secondary players drafted in the NFL this last year. So there's a lot to replace, but that's an interesting group. And then I think right after that, the purple schools, as I call them, TCU and Kansas State are going to be really interesting. TCU, a bunch of returning production along the lines of scrimmage, but you got Jaden Craig replacing the departed Josh Hoover, who's now at Indiana at quarterback. And then for Kansas State, can Colin Klein, who you mentioned, come back in and get the best out of Avery Johnson, who came onto the scene with all this talent and fanfare, hasn't maybe had the consistency to elevate himself into some of those high-end quarterback conversations around the country, but still has so much ability in an offense and with a coach who knows how to use that particular skill set because it very closely mirrors his own. I think makes them really interesting, combined with the fact that I think outside of Texas Tech, they have the most favorable schedule in the Big 12.
I know you're reuniting with your father, and you're going to go back on the radio with ESPN coming up in just less than a month. One of the things that I thought that really caught my eye or ear, or whatever you want to say, was the job that the Turner, what's the TNT, did with the Big 12, and you were a significant part of that. I thought you guys, with the pregame show and everything, it was so cool to see basically an outlet devoted to the conference in a sense. So I'm wondering, with all the stuff you got going on, are you back at that this season?
I am, yes. So we're all going to be back in full force. Me and JB Long, who was my play-by-play partner in the booth, are running it back again this year. We got an army of great sideline reporters that are going to be a part of our coverage. And you mentioned the studio crew with Lefko, Takeo, Champ Bailey, Victor Cruz. They're as fun and entertaining as anyone on TV. And like you said, it is wall-to-wall coverage of this great conference. So we're excited. We get to start the season in Morgantown. We head to Manhattan, Kansas in week 2, and then head to Tucson in week 3. So we got that schedule laid out in front of us. And then, we're going to be like everyone else. We'll read and react. We'll get our assignments, and we'll get ready to venture all across the Big 12, which, as you guys know now, a bigger footprint than ever before. So the frequent flyers get racked up in a hurry.
Read and react. I like it. Any individuals ready to break out is, the Heisman Trophy seems so overblown, and it seems like you have to be a quarterback and you have to win. But are there any individuals who could be stars, must-see highlights that you've got to see? A couple of years ago, Colorado had a couple of them, so it always jumps around, and these guys take off for the NFL or they take off for a bigger NIL payday somewhere. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And like you said, maybe Heisman's the wrong way to look at this, but I'll go back to a name I mentioned before, in Rayner coming over from Arkansas State to Iowa State. Like, again, I don't know if the infrastructure around him is going to be in a place to protect him adequately, to have the kind of weapons consistently that are going to allow him to show off the gifts. But I said it when I saw Jimmy Rogers at Media Day. I said, you got a grown-up playing quarterback. I was amazed going back and turning on the A-State tape and watching the poise that he played with. Outside, quite honestly, of Devin Dampier and maybe Avery Johnson, he's probably going to come in and be the third best scrambler in the conference and maybe could go above that. I don't think the athlete of the other two, but just has such a keen sense in the open field. But you see him do the thing that we all know is so coveted in quarterbacks. When things start to get murky in the pocket around him, he's able to move, buy time, and keep his eyes downfield and find guys and make it look so effortless. And so I'm fascinated to see how he grows his profile. I think he's one of the guys, too, that benefits from the 5-5 and could have an extra year on the back end. And so he's going to be one where if things go well for him, they're going to have the interesting dilemma on their hands of, does someone else come knocking on his door? Is he a guy that potentially increases his NIL buy, or can they get him to stick around and kind of put some roots down there around a guy that I think if he gets some help can really be a difference maker for a team looking to make a big change this year?
We understand, Mike, that the coach, Deion Sanders' health situation was very serious last year. I don't make light of it by any stretch, obviously, when you're in that situation. And there's no doubt that it had an effect on the entire program, and obviously they had a disappointing season. As you evaluate it, though, I think for me, just his return to health, I don't think is simply, it's extremely important in the scheme of things, obviously, but I don't think that's good enough for the team to be better. It's going to come down to the roster, obviously, and basically what do you think of them being able to have a comeback, because I think it goes beyond, even though it'll help, Deion Sanders being healthy and being able to do what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's like you said, we can simultaneously say, what a blessing. We're also glad that Deion Sanders is healthy, able to give his full time and attention to this now that the most important thing is taken care of. But I'm with you. We talked about the difficulty that comes with turnover, and we've seen for Colorado year to year, it's not just the fact that they're portaling en masse. It's that the coaching staff's getting a new facelift almost every year, that multiple times Deion Sanders has moved on from a coordinator in season, elevated someone, and then made a change in the offseason. So if you're the players in this program, you're getting to know a new group of your guys every year. You're having to learn different coaching going into every season. And I think it just makes it hard to grow in the ways that you could, with Deion Sanders and the success we've seen him have in the past. So I certainly have my doubts. Julian Lewis, the quarterback we haven't talked about, one who we got a limited look at last year, but I got to call their game on the road against West Virginia. And you guys remember Julian Lewis was one of the quarterbacks that got thrown into the end of that massacre against Utah where they plucked the wings off Colorado. And then the next week they give him the start against West Virginia, who defensively throws a ton at you, is going to challenge you from the neck up. And I was amazed at the poise that Julian Lewis, as a true freshman, displayed there. The arm talent that was on display, him getting the ball to Amari Miller, who's now wearing Sun Devils colors, but was a great receiver for Colorado last year. And so I thought, okay, there's a lot to build on with this, but you lose one of the best offensive linemen in the country in Jordan Seaton to LSU. You turn over so much there. It's really hard for me to see the foundation laid for success. And I know Deion says internally they've already turned the corner. We just haven't seen the fruit, but I'm going to have to see it before I'm going to believe it at this point with the Buffs right now.
Agreed.
Mike Golic Jr. joining us. PK mentioned he went to Arizona State. Because of that, during commercial breaks, I hear a lot about the Sun Devils. And he's got specific stories about Kenny Dillingham that have been backed up by wins on the field and obviously the conference title and the crazy game with Texas in the playoff. But I look at their schedule this year and think, what? Morgan State, the money game out of the gate, but then at Texas A&M and then straight overseas to play Kansas. They get a bye week when they come back. That seems like the Sun Devils they're biting off a lot there. And they got a roster in transition because they had some good players and other people came calling them with a pile of NIL money. What's your outlook for the Devils?
Yeah, it's a great point. And as someone that's an alum of a game abroad, we started our season in Ireland my last year at Notre Dame. That recovery time on the back end, even with a bye, is a bear. And you're doing something that's atypical. And you guys know we're all searching for routine in athletics, and especially college sports with big rosters, young players that are still in a development stage. So anything you do throws it off there. But this is going to be, I have a ton of respect for Kenny Dillingham. Someone asked me at media days, they're like, of the coaches that you've met and talked to, or they're guys where you'd be like, oh yeah, I absolutely wanted to play for him. And Kenny's an easy answer for that question. He's so genuine. He brings such an infectious energy to his program. We got to see some of their practices and put that on display last year, but he's got an uphill battle with the talent they lost this year. We just mentioned, you bring a guy like Amari Miller in here to help replace some of the production from Jordan Tyson, but there's no replacing that. Jordan Tyson, I thought, when healthy, was the best receiver in last year's class. Maxi Onachor is a first-round pick. And the offensive line, you're still trying to get the answer to the quarterback question. You lose some talent on defense. And so they've portaled well in, but with the challenges you mentioned schedule-wise and the specific pain points on the roster this year, if they manage to stay in contention, this is going to be one of Kenny's most impressive coaching jobs.
Mike Golic Jr. has been appointed the czar, the commissioner, the grand poobah of college football. What does he do with the playoff?
I would put it at 16 and set it there. I think 24, we're changing so much about the sport in a way that I think is detrimental to the things that have made it great for so long. And I just think you've got to keep the regular season special. Scarcity is your ally. We've always had games that have felt like pseudo playoff games during the regular season. And listen, when we expanded to 12, we saw that started to take some of the edge off, but still, rivalry games mattered, even if they weren't elimination games the way they used to. The 16-team playoff would assuage some of that. And I don't know if it solves the problem of, some teams like the Notre Dame USC conversation around trying to optimize scheduling for a more robust conference slate with how you schedule out of conference. I don't know if 16 all of a sudden makes teams more bold, but I don't know if 24 would do that either. I think we're seeing teams right now trying to play copycat with some of what they've seen, but I think 16 would be a more palatable number. I think 24 gets a little too unwieldy.
How much more do we need of Miami coming as a 10 seed and Bama winning on the road before people are like, wow, this is awesome? Let's expand it.
Listen.
Because people thought 12 was too many, but those two games, well, Miami more than one game, and the whole run to the title game, that had to open some eyes about the depth in college football in the NIL era.
Well, yeah, and I mean, listen, you look at Notre Dame and Ohio State the year before. Like, there's no question we have flattened the curve. It is not the talent glut at Ohio State and Georgia and Bama the way it was in the 4-team CFP era. Throw Clemson in that mix as well. You're right. There are more teams that have access to a national title than we've seen in quite some time, and so it is more competitive down on the back end of that. And teams like Indiana have shown us you can flip things in a hurry in a way that rewards that kind of access. So it did happen at the right time, and I had to take my medicine on that. I was, against expansion. I thought we rarely had 4 teams that could make things happen, but the only constant right now in college athletics is change, and the NIL portal world definitely changed it so that we have more teams that are more competitive for longer.
You jealous that you didn't play in that era? Maybe cash in a little bit more?
It certainly would have been nice. I mean, to at least, I would say in South Bend, Indiana, if you had given me like $10,000 or $20,000, I'd have lived like a king. In most of these college towns, I go back to South Bend and I get the bar tab at the end of the night, and I'm praising the heavens. I'm going over to the grotto to say a prayer for what a beauty that is. So I couldn't imagine walking around with the kind of money these guys do. But, you hear it from coaches around media day. I've heard players making the jump to the NFL talking about it's had these guys grow up pretty quick in terms of learning how to manage it, in reinvesting it into their bodies, into their athletic training in a way that I think in a weird way combined with keeping some guys from making the jump to the NFL when they might not be a perfect fit physically, when it might be a reach in terms of their draft grade. I think it's in a way giving us a better product on the field in terms of continuity in important positions like quarterback and skill development at positions along the line of scrimmage in a way that's kind of interesting to monitor. I don't know if we have the sample size yet to say it definitively, but I've seen some anecdotal evidence that says, hey, we're getting guys that are taking this seriously now with that money in a way that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I love, and I've said this on the show, I loved what your guy Love did out of Notre Dame. He goes, third to the Cardinals? And then, I keep abreast of what's going on in the Phoenix media, and he says that, hey, I don't plan to spend any of this money because I've been getting NIL. I'm well off. And I'm thinking, you go, young man. That's exactly what I want to hear. I don't want to hear you buying 16 cars and a bunch of stupid stuff because this is the NFL, and, you could be done here in a hit or two, and who knows what's going to happen. So take that money and make that money invested in rather than spend it. And then he says, I'm already well off because I've been getting money. I'm fine with that, and I think that's the way to go.
I think it's a great thing because, my buddies that were fortunate to enjoy even, modest NFL careers said, it's the not for long thing, but it provides you a cushion. Like most NFL guys don't leave set for life. That's the quarterbacks. That's the upper echelon. But you leave with a cushion to figure out, all right, what am I going to do next when my job inevitably changes, when I'm not making a high 6-figure or low 7-figure salary every year? And so it provides you that buffer. Now you're getting that in college where before you already had the benefit of, all right, I'm coming out without debt because I've been on scholarship. I've been able to save money that way. But now some guys have been able to put money away. Now guys can spend 3, 4, 5 years building that nest egg and that buffer. So, hey, if they make the jump and they don't have the size, speed measurables to be an NFL player, well, they've got that said same buffer now as they figure out how to navigate life in the real world and can use their gifts that made them stars, that made them valuable to these schools to help set themselves up and their families up to have a better, more comfortable life going forward in a way that should be the goal. Higher education overall is about trying to provide people the tools they need to build a better future for themselves and their families, however they choose whatever their vocation. Why should it be any different with this?
Mike Golic Jr., final thing on the way out the door. We love predictions, even though we know they're impossible. I don't want to know who's going to be the champion or anything like that. The way this is going with so much money, so big an investment, will a coach get fired in September this year?
Ooh, I hope not, and I think maybe for that reason I'm going to say no. I don't know if we're quite in that point yet, but it's amazing.
Yeah, UCLA.
It's true. It's true.
That's why I asked.
I listen to it this way. I'm hoping it's not the case. I think across the board we talk about the lack of patience from, players who jump in the portal so quickly, all the changes that happen here. I do think at some point, college football and college athletics, the conversation starts with the adults in the room more often than not, and the tone they need to set. And we've heard about the complaints about the multi-million-dollar buyouts, all this money that's spent on people to not coach. Like, I do think, especially in this day and age, September ends up being an extended preseason. And so you've got to kind of give these teams time to find out who they are. And listen, if you think you got a coach you're going to fire in September, chances are you probably should have made that decision in November. So once again, I'd look at leadership and say, why were you trying to force something that you were so clearly ready to part ways with?
Yeah, well, the grown-ups in the room are writing those big buyout checks. I'd rather listen to Jeremiah Love. He's not even close to half my age, but I'd rather listen to him. All right, Mike, thanks a lot. We appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on and talking a little Big 12 football with us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Mike Golic Jr., you can see him. He doesn't work for ESPN. He does the TNT work. He's out there covering the Big 12.